Fact: Bakura is 1-4 in his completed on-screen duels. Fact: Bakura's only win comes against a certifiable loser in Bonz. Fact: Bakura's aces are a 5-star with 1800 attack and a Nomi. Fact: Bakura often misplays. And yet, Bakura is still arguably a top 5 duelist and definitively top 10 in duel monsters. In this video, I'll explain why. First of all, I don't even know why I need to make this video. I mean, Merrick point blank asked Bakura,
"How strong are your dueling skills?"
They're extremely strong.
Excellent.
I love how Merrick just takes Bakura's word for it.
Excellent.
Excellent.
Anyway, let's start with the first apparent black mark on Bakura's resume, his dueling record. As stated, Bakura is 1-4 in duels he finishes in the anime, and while I will agree with the general principle that record and win percentage matter, they also need to be contextualized. 3 of Bakura's losses come to the Pharaoh, such that if any of them flip to wins, the series abruptly ends. His other loss comes to who was at the time the lead antagonist, Yami Bakura Battle City. While there's at least a sliver of possibility that we get a crazy plot twist and the main antagonist is taken out by someone other than the main protagonist, let alone another villain, it would have made for very poor writing to have Bakura win this duel. Yes, it's a plot armor argument, and I myself prefer to minimize plot armor arguments, but if that's your cup of tea, it's worth pointing out. Bakura's lone win in the anime comes against what I said in my own words, a certifiable loser in Bonz. Of all the named duelists in the show who get at least one on-screen duel, Bonz is easily in the bottom 10, if not bottom 5, so this isn't exactly an impressive win. It's worth noting though that in the manga, Bakura actually collects his locator cards across multiple duels, whereas in the anime, the writers decided to get him all 5 in one shot versus Bonz. While a couple of extra wins against no-names isn't hard evidence of Bakura being in the top 5, the 48 participants of Battle City were either rare hunters, vetted by Kaiba as qualified enough to enter the tournament, or Joey. So having 3 to 5 wins against some of the best duels in Japan is at least worth a mention. Speaking of manga exclusives, Bakura actually has one duel that takes place in Millennium World that doesn't take place in the anime, that against Joey. This is a very short duel where Bakura summons Zoma, then Joey summons Panther Warrior and destroys Zoma with it. Zoma's effect then activates, which inflicts damage to the opposing player equal to double the attack of the monster that destroyed it. Since Panther Warrior has 2000 attack, this would be a one-shot victory by Bakura. The duel technically doesn't end because while Zoma is in the process of resolving, Thief King Bakura has just thrown the Pharaoh down a cliff, causing the World of Memories to cease since the Pharaoh is blacked out at this point in time. Now, to be completely fair, we can't definitively give Bakura the win since Joey had 5 cards in hand, so it's at least possible he had a way to mitigate or negate the damage, but when Bakura summons Zoma versus Yugi, Joey seems to imply that he would have indeed lost this duel. Either way, this scene shows that Bakura is no longer messing around, that at his absolute peak, he's capable of defeating a consensus top 10 duelist in one turn. In lieu of this duel in the anime is Bakura's rooftop duel with Kaiba. Bakura challenges Kaiba so that Diabound in the Dark RPG can gain the power of Blue Eyes once the card version destroys Kaiba's Blue Eyes in battle. In the spirit of the manga duel versus Joey, this one too comes to an abrupt end when Bakura leaves, but I've done an in-depth analysis of this duel where I project who could have won. Long story short, it's very close, and Bakura does have multiple paths to winning on his ensuing turn. So on paper, Bakura is 1-4 with 1 no contest in the anime, and somewhere between 3-3 to 5-3 with 1 no contest in the manga. That extra loss in the anime, by the way, comes in the anime exclusive duel between Bakura and the Pharaoh during Duelist Kingdom. When we take a look at who his losses come to, we quickly understand that his record on paper is a poor indication of his dueling skill, especially when we look at the nature of these losses. While we can chalk up Bakura's losses to the plot armor of his opponents, we can dig even further into these duels to understand just how Bakura did. Most duels between decent duelists are close, but the closest ones involve a fair amount of back and forth, with the closest coming down to a top deck. To put it simply, the quality of the loss matters when we really want to drill down into ranking duels because records are otherwise obscured by plot armor. And perhaps no one has the most quality collection of losses as Bakura, or in other words, no one is as close to winning in each of their losses. His first loss in the anime is attributed to nothing the Pharaoh did, rather regular Bakura interfering with the effect of Change of Heart, which would have otherwise won Yami Bakura the duel. This whole duel is based on the Monster World tabletop RPG between Yami Bakura and Yugi from the manga, and the final sequence of that duel in fact does involve regular Bakura interfering with Yami Bakura's dice rolls, hence why the anime writers scripted the duel to end the way it did. It just comes across far more shenanigan-y in a duel as compared to the RPG. His second loss comes in a situation where the Pharaoh literally had no move to make, except the move he ended up making. Had the Pharaoh attacked with any other monster, the Spirit of the Dark Sanctuary would have burned him for game, and had he just passed or tried to stall, Destiny Board would have won the game for Bakura. What happened instead was one of the best top decks of the series, where the Pharaoh drew Slifer, the one card in his deck unaffected by the Dark Spirit. His third loss differs depending on which continuity you want to look at. In both, Bakura has an army of fiends ready to attack Yami Merrick for game on his next turn. What happens in the manga is that Yami Merrick top decks into Monster Reborn to revive Ra for the win. What happens in the anime is that Yami Merrick has Reborn from Bakura after taking it with exchange. In either case, the only reason Ra is in Yami Merrick's grave is because regular Merrick assured Bakura that Ra would be of no use to him there, unaware of a number of Ra's hidden effects such as instant attack, point-to-point transfer, and Immortal Phoenix. Had regular Merrick known these powers, he would have never advised Bakura to send Ra to the grave, and thus Yami Merrick may not have even seen Ra the entire duel. And finally, his fourth loss comes to Yugi in similar fashion to his loss to the Pharaoh in Battle City, but in my opinion, even worse. Bakura's Undead Lock strategy has destroyed all but one card of Yugi's deck, and that one card just happens to be the one card that could have won Yugi the duel, Gandora the Dragon of Destruction. In the manga, he still has more cards remaining in his deck, but Bakura implies that Yugi only has one turn left, and Yugi himself says Gandora was the only card that could break the Undead Lock. To sum things up in the anime, his losses come to an out-of-duel shenanigan, two situations where Bakura had game except by virtue of his opponent's miraculous top deck, and not knowing the many effects of Ra. In the manga, it's 3 straight top decks where Bakura otherwise had the duel won, to the extent that leading up to the top deck, each of his opponents felt they had lost the duel, or at the very least had their backs very much against the wall. Again, these are in fact losses, but rather than cry plot armor, I want to show that these losses aren't the same as losses other duelists suffer. Bakura is as close to winning each of these duels as you can possibly be. While his opponents end up making unlikely comebacks, the man undeniably goes out swinging like a champ, and this is in large part to how he duels, or more specifically, the cards and strategies he employs. Bakura, in my opinion, demonstrates the best deck building throughout Duel Monsters. I know I'm sounding a bit like a hot take artist here, what with claiming he's a top 5 duelist and top 1 deck builder, but hear me out on this one. The biggest reason why I rank Bakura so highly in terms of deck building is that he's one of 3 duelists in the manga to run at least 2 distinct decks. Most other main characters simply evolve their core strategy with new cards. In the anime, only a handful of duelists run 2 distinct decks. The only one who rivals Bakura is Merrick and Yami Merrick, who in totality run 4 decks: the Slifer deck, Brainwash Joey's deck, the Ra deck, and Brainwash Bandit Keith's deck, although Merrick doesn't actually build Joey's or Keith's deck himself, so Bakura takes the tiebreaker with 4 distinct decks, each of which he built: his Morphing Jar deck in Duelist Kingdom, his Occult deck in Battle City, his Diabound deck versus Kaiba, and his Undead Lock deck versus Yugi. Let's take a look at each of those decks. Strategies are pretty basic in Duelist Kingdom back when the game was very elementary, but Bakura still has a pretty decent plan cooked up in his first anime duel versus the Pharaoh. Having turned all the friends into their favorite cards, Bakura puts pressure on the Pharaoh by not only having him have to win the duel, but to not send any of his friend cards to the grave in the process. Bakura immediately backs the Pharaoh into a corner by resolving 2 Morphing Jars. This forces the Pharaoh to summon his friends the moment he draws them out of fear of having them discarded. But then what does Bakura do? Use cards like Just Desserts and Man-Eater Bug, which punish the Pharaoh for having monsters on the field. The strategy catches the Pharaoh between a rock and a hard place and is only thwarted by the script inexplicably having Bakura activate Just Desserts prior to the Pharaoh summoning Taya, but I'll talk about this more in the Misplay section. Bakura's next strategy is his Occult deck from Battle City, which in actuality has 3 components to it. First is the Army of Fiend Monsters, the aspect of the deck he leans into as his win condition versus Bonz and Merrick. Second and third are the win conditions he leans into versus the Pharaoh, which yet again puts the Pharaoh between a rock and a hard place. That rock is Destiny Board, a trap that in 5 turns will win the duel for Bakura, but should the Pharaoh try an attack, the hard place is the Dark Spirit of the Sanctuary, which will burn the Pharaoh's life points. And while the spirit can only possess one of the Pharaoh's monsters per turn, Bakura activates the Dark Door to ensure that the Pharaoh can only attack with 1 monster per turn, and has Dark Spirit of Silence to change who the attacking monster is in case the Pharaoh does declare an attack with an unpossessed monster. This strategy is so good, it gets a nod from Kaiba not once, but twice, which basically doubles the number of times Kaiba was ever impressed by anything. Now, to play devil's advocate, there was a sequence in the manga where Merrick had to point out a flaw in Bakura's Destiny Board strategy, deducing for Bakura that the Pharaoh had Monster Reborn set on his field at a point where Bakura couldn't tell if the Pharaoh was simply bluffing about having found the weak point. The moment Reborn revives Necrofear, Destiny Board and the Dark Spirit will cease, but while the strategy isn't as bulletproof as it seems, Bakura does end up playing around that weakness. On a somewhat related note, this is another point for my position that Merrick is a better duelist than you think. Bakura's next strategy in the anime is his brief duel versus Kaiba. While it only lasts 6 turns, we do still get to see a pretty strong setup where he gets out Dia-bound and creates a copy of it, such that one can weaken an opponent's monster while the other destroys it. He also sets up a defense with Spirit Shield such that as long as he can remove fiends and zombies from his grave, his opponent can't attack him. And finally is his duel versus Yugi, where he unveils his Undead Lock strategy. This involves a 2-card combo between Cursed Twin Dolls and Counterbalance, the form which nullifies his graveyard and causes all the cards to appear as non-usable tokens on the field, and the latter which forces Yugi to lose cards off the top of his deck during each of his end phases equal to the number of cards on the field, inclusive of said tokens. Bakura bolsters this lock with a slew of Necro monsters that multiply like bunnies and narrow corridor to slow down Yugi's assault while Counterbalance decks him out. On the whole, not only does Bakura show versatility through the use of various cards and strategies, but he also taps into multiple win conditions from burn to deck out to destiny board to traditional attacks. More than anyone else, Bakura demonstrates his mastery over the card pool and the different ways to win the game. But if he has this so-called mastery, why does he make so many misplays? Simple. He doesn't. As was the case with the Merrick video, most of Bakura's misplays can be chalked up to poor duel adaptations on the part of the anime. The anime writers will often change up the duel action to make things more dramatic, prolong duels, market newly released cards, and/or align cards and gameplay more closely to the real-life game. None of these reasons are plot or character driven, which is why I reject the position that just because they're different continuities, we have to take all the changes into account. Instead, I look to the manga version of duels as the source of truth anytime we come across an apparent misplay or inconsistency in the anime. This isn't to say the anime version of duels aren't fun and engaging, they are. But the anime writers are there to craft a compelling story, not necessarily to get all the duel details down pat. Let's go backwards and start with Bakura's duel versus Yugi in the World of Memories. There aren't any glaring misplays here, but one thing people will point to is Bakura's haste during one of Yugi's battle phases. Yugi enters with Silent Swordsman at 1500 attack, too weak to take down Doom Caliber Knight at 1900. So why would he enter the battle phase? Obviously because he has a card that will turn the tables, so the smart thing for Bakura to do would be to wait and see for what that said card is. Instead, Bakura hastily activates Call of the Earthbound to force Silent Swordsman to attack, then immediately activates Zoma the Spirit to force the Swordsman to attack it, such that when Zoma is destroyed, it'll be like with Joey, that Zoma will inflict double the attack of the Swordsman to Yugi as damage, and in the case of the anime, win Bakura the duel on the spot. Yugi nullifies this with Turn Jump, which is the card he likely intended to use to boost his Swordsman to 3000 attack to attack over Doom Caliber. So had Bakura just waited, he could have then used his 2-card combo to force the 3000 attack Swordsman to destroy Zoma and inflict 6000 damage. Right? Wrong. In the manga, instead of Call of the Earthbound, Bakura uses Ghost Beckoning, a card that has a similar effect of forcing an opponent's monster to attack, but must be activated at the start of the battle phase. Alright. So the 1500 attack Swordsman is about to ram into the 1900 attack Doom Caliber. Surely now Bakura will wait to see what Yugi intends to counter with, right? Again, wrong. Yugi does start to play his card, but then holds back because he realizes Bakura may be onto something more. Because remember, in the manga, Yugi did briefly see Zoma in action versus Joey, so it's reasonable for Yugi to think that's what Bakura is planning. Sure enough, when Yugi changes his mind about activating his card, Bakura then follows up with Zoma, and then we get the remaining sequence. So I don't look at this as a misplay on Bakura's part, rather just a very smart play by Yugi. Working through his Battle City duels now, the big thing people will call Bakura out for is not activating Destiny Board as soon as possible. Had he, then given how many turns his duel versus Merrick and the Pharaoh lasted, he would have seemingly won. But this too is a result of differences in adaptation, where the anime is staying true to Destiny Board's in real life effect, whereas in the manga, Destiny Board can't be activated until Dark Necrofear is destroyed. What's even sillier on the part of the anime is that Bakura still doesn't activate Destiny Board until the turn after Necrofear is destroyed, a move the writers made as a means of prolonging the duel. Rest assured, Bakura does activate Destiny Board the same turn Necrofear is destroyed in the manga. Ergo, no misplay. The next apparent misplay is Bakura summoning a Fiend 3 turns in a row with no defenses to start the duel versus the Pharaoh. In the anime, it would make far more sense at the very least to summon these monsters in defense position. However, this too is a result of Dark Necrofear's effect being changed to match its in real life effect. To summon Necrofear, you need to banish 3 monsters from your grave. However, in the manga, there are 2 additional conditions: that the fiends need to have been destroyed while in attack mode, and destroyed over the last 5 turns. If the anime had Bakura summon these monsters in defense, his life points wouldn't be low enough for Slifer to take him out, so rather than further change the duel, they simply kept consistent with his moves in the manga, which creates the illusion of misplays by having him take unnecessary damage when in reality, it was necessary in the manga. I will say though that Bakura was definitely playing with fire here, since if the Pharaoh had summoned literally any monster in his deck not named Karibo on his 3rd turn, he would have won on the spot. It would have made far more sense script-wise for Bakura to get the Dark Door by his 2nd turn as opposed to his 5th turn, so that the Pharaoh could only attack with 1 monster per turn. Overall, while his strategy is incredibly strong, I do at the very least have to grade the initial setup as stupidly risky. Another giant alleged misplay on Bakura's part is keeping Monster Reborn in hand when he activates Exchange versus Yami Merrick. Regardless of the fact that he didn't know Reborn is Ra's BFF, it's still an incredibly silly thing to do to give your opponent one of the most powerful cards in the game. Bakura himself admits that Merrick took a strong card, but yet again, all of this is not a reality in the manga where Bakura doesn't activate Exchange at all, and Merrick draws his own Reborn. Why the anime felt the need for Merrick to take Reborn instead of drawing his own is beyond me, but maybe they were trying to cut back on the number of top decks. Staying in the Merrick duel, yes, this duel single-handedly convinced so many people that Bakura sucks as a duelist. Bakura appears to make even more misplays by tribute summoning for Ra instead of first attacking with his monsters, since Vengeful Bog Spirit would have prevented him from attacking with any monster the turn it summoned. While Bakura could have done this, keep in mind that Merrick has a face-down card, so the safe thing to do is in fact bring out the monster unaffected by most things. We later come to learn Merrick has powerful traps like Mirror Force, so while Bakura doesn't know this at the time, it is again the safe move to go for the unbeatable boss. However, Bakura could have certainly activated Premature Burial this turn to revive Earl of Demise, because every turn he delays summoning a monster, it gets further delayed from attacking thanks to Bog Spirit. So yes, this could be classed as a misplay, but again, this whole sequence doesn't take place in the manga. Meanwhile, the anime version of this duel is just a hive for apparent misplays by both of these dudes because again, the anime writers tend to prioritize drama over gameplay. Look no further than the fact that Bakura changes Ra to defense mode the same turn he summoned it in attack mode. And then we walk it back to Duelist Kingdom for Bakura's first duel in the anime. The thing about this arc is that it's very elementary in its gameplay, so a card like Just Desserts, which inflicts 500 damage to the opponent per monster they control, is absurdly powerful at a time when duels started with 2000 life points. It's an insane card to have, but Bakura inexplicably activates it when the Pharaoh only has 3 monsters out. As explained earlier, Bakura had a strategy that essentially forced the Pharaoh to summon his monsters rather than keep them in his hand out of fear of Morphing Jar. So Bakura had only one reason to activate Just Desserts the moment he did: Plot Armor. In universe though, yes, we have to chalk this up as a massive misplay unless there's some hidden rule of Duelist Kingdom that you can't burn your opponent for game, kind of like how you can't attack directly. To summarize, Bakura makes no misplays in the manga and has 2 in the anime, and in both continuities, he makes one stupidly risky play. On the surface, it definitely feels like Yami Bakura is lacking as a duelist. Both Takahashi and the anime writers could have done him a solid by giving him more impressive wins. For example, instead of the laser battle with Pegasus, he duels and defeats Pegasus. He could have also had to duel all 3 Ishtars in order to gain access to the stone tablets or the secret information they keep about the Pharaoh. Defeating both prior villains would have been a great twist. Or perhaps going through and having him defeat Kaiba and Joey in the final season. Sure enough, every villain defeats at least one of those 2 as a means of establishing them as formidable. So having Bakura defeat neither is a huge flaw in building up his character, whereas defeating both would have been the perfect way to elevate him as the biggest threat that only Yugi can stop. But I'll get off my soapbox now. To recap, Bakura's 1-4 record in the anime, or 3-3 to 5-3 in the manga, is not the best indication of his dueling prowess. Even if we suspend plot armor debates, his losses are some of the closest duels in the series, requiring his opponent to top deck their way out of a corner. Through various decks and strategies, he showcases a mastery of the game paralleled only by the best in the series, and the vast majority of his misplays in the anime can be explained away by inconsistent adaptations from the manga, wherein he makes no misplays. So with all that laid out, did I hit the goal of convincing you that Bakura is definitively a top 10 and arguably top 5 duelist in the original series? Comment your thoughts and make sure you subscribe to this channel. Some might say it's arguably a top 5 channel in all of Yu-Gi-Oh!